Of course, another thing that was so amazing about being a secretary in those days was that you had to use all sorts of really archaic equipment, which would have been the state of the art in those days.
A gestetner comes to mind.
A gestetner.
A gestetner.
Yes, so this is the machine that makes multiple copies of something. And you have to do this by typing onto a sort of like a skin.
That's right.
And it's very hard to get the keys to go through the skin. And then you have to mount this thing on a drum, which is sort of filled with ink. And then you have to
roll it and crank it up and keep... oh, my goodness me.
Dreaded someone saying I'd got to do one of those. Because it never worked properly, and all the things didn't come through, and it was all blobby and horrible. I mean, it was just horrible, wasn't it?
And do you remember the carbon copies? And your boss would say, I want 3 carbon copies of that, please. Yes, and you'd put them in the time, they'd slip sometimes.
Yes. Oh, terrible.
And you'd have this carbon paper in between. You made a mistake, and you had to try and Tipp-Ex it out.
And your fingers would be all black.
We didn't have Tipp-Ex. We
Not
had
later on.
We must have had little rubbers to do that.
Right.
Of course, because Tipp-Ex came later.
And it was the most peculiar telephones. You had to sort of switch things.
Fax
through.
machines.
Well, that was later.
That was later, wasn't it?
Later.
The fax machines,
yes,
but there was something teletext.
Well, I didn't have one of those.
I think teletext. I was in a bank at some place and we had teletext, something like that. But I might be making that up. I'll have to have a real think about that.
It was a complicated process.
And manual typewriters.
Manual typewriters.
No electric typewriters.
And so what you do, you take your letters down in shorthand, and that was fraught with problems because often you couldn't read your own sort of back.
Oh, it was dreadful.
And you'd be sort of toiling over it for ages, trying to work out what you'd written down.
Nightmare, actually.
And then you'd have to type it all up, and then with all this complicated machinery, you'd probably make lots of mistakes. So one simple letter could take you, perhaps an hour to sort out.
It was dreadful, wasn't it?
There you are, that's the way
and
it was.
I tell you the other thing I remember, typing pools.
Oh yes, they were horrible.
Now I remember temping in a typing. It was a builder's merchants, and there was a very fierce lady that ran the typing pool, which they all were actually, weren't they?
Yes.
And some of them builders used to come in and flirt with the girls and things, but she was having none of it. No. Absolutely back to your typewriters. And I tell you when that was. That was when we had a 3-day week because we were typing by candlelight.
Typing by candlelight. Well,